In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the water pump on this Toyota Camry with the 2.5 liter engine. If you need this or any other part, check us out at oneauto.com. Let's get started. From underneath the front of the vehicle, you'll see this splash shield here that protects everything, but right underneath it, you'll see a radiator drain. This is the petcock. We'll have to turn this counterclockwise and coolant will come out of here. Now there is a hole provided in the splash shield right here. However, if you have a piece of hose that will go right onto this spout here, go ahead and use it. It will minimize the mess. That's exactly what I'm gonna do. If not, that's all right. The coolant should come straight out here, but sometimes it does splash on the splash shield and kind of get all over the place. Stick this in if you have it. There we go. And now turn this counterclockwise. Sometimes you'll need some pliers. It looks like that's the case for me. A lot of times these get stuck just from being out in the open here. Any small pliers you have should do the trick. This should not require a lot of force. Also, make sure you don't break it when you do this. And don't take this all the way out. Just remove it until coolant starts coming out of here. If you take it all the way out, it's going to start shooting coolant out the back where the plug is. All right, I have coolant coming out of my drain hose right now. So let's go up top, open that radiator cap so we can relieve the vacuum that is currently being pulled by coolant coming out of here. At the top, remove the radiator cap by turning this counterclockwise. I'm just going to set it right back down here, but not actually tighten it on. My coolant is pretty much done draining, so I'm going to close this off again, make sure it's nice and snug, ready for reassembly. You don't have to use pliers to tighten it. It can break just by hand. There is an O-ring inside here that does the sealing, so just snug it and you should be good to go. However, I will absorb all this drippage that's happening here so that it doesn't continue dripping on the ground. There we go. For this procedure, we have to disconnect the battery. I'm going to take the negative terminal off, take a 10mm wrench or socket and ratchet, and loosen up this mounting nut on the terminal. Once you twist it a few turns, you should be able to pull this up and off. I'm going to clean this corrosion before we reinstall it, but set it aside to where it cannot make connection with the battery terminal. And if you have one of these insulators, I'm going to set it here so I can clean everything up before I put it back together. Now looking towards the passenger side, you'll see the belt tensioner right there. You have two options. You can put a 14mm socket right on that cutout at the top, or towards the bottom, right where the pulley is, there's another 14mm cutout. I'm just gonna go for the top one because it's a whole lot easier to reach. So grab a socket or a wrench, and with that on, turn clockwise. That should release tension off of the belt. It shouldn't be very tight, and then you can just pull the belt off of anything that you can reach. I'm just going to pull it off of the alternator because it's the easiest to reach pulley, just like that. Now you can let go of your tool, remove it, and you don't have to take the belt off completely, but I like to do this so that it can give me a whole lot more space to work with. I'm going to provide you with a diagram that will show you how to properly route this belt back on when it comes time to reinstalling it, but you can also take some pictures or mental notes if you'd like, so that you can reference that. In the center of this tensioner, you'll see a 12mm mounting bolt. That's all that holds this tensioner onto the engine block. So put a socket or a wrench on here and break it free. If you use a socket, make sure you don't get it stuck between the bolt and the frame here. There's very little clearance. Once I break it free, I can take it out by hand, and hopefully you can too. Now, if you do have to use a tool, like a wrench or a ratchet and a socket, just be careful, because once you get it jammed in here, well, it's going to be very difficult to get it out. This bolt will not come out all the way. It will come out with the tensioner. There you go. So that's free. And now we can take the tensioner off of the engine block. Sometimes they're a little bit stuck, so you can take a pry bar and just gently pry it off. Oh, there we go. There is your tensioner. At the front of the alternator, there's a boot here that I'm going to peel off so we can access the mounting bolts for this main power wire. It's a 10mm, so let's get that off. Sometimes these are stuck on here. They shouldn't be very tight, but just make sure you don't damage things in the way. Take that off, pull the wire off, and now right underneath it, right here, there's an electrical connector. This just has a tab on the back side that if you press, you should be able to unplug it. And now if you spread these two wires apart, there's a 10mm bolt right down here holding on this bracket. Remove that. Don't lose it. And you can take the bracket with the harness right off. I'm going to unplug this sensor so I can get more slack out of this harness. This is also a single wire connector, so it's very delicate. Take this off. Now you can pull the harness further. Optional, but recommended. Take out this bracket by removing these two 14mm bolts. Underneath it, you'll find a retainer for the wiring harness. It has a little clip here that if you pry out like that, you can slide this out and get even more slack. Plus, now we have space here to pull the alternator out. On the front bottom side of the alternator, you'll see that 14mm bolt right there. Let's break this free and remove it. This one's pretty tight. You'll need some decent leverage here. Once you break it free though, it should come out fairly easily unless the threads are corroded. There we go, set that aside. And on the top of the alternator, there's another 14mm bolt right here. Break this free as well. This is a through bolt. It goes through the alternator and the bracket and then back into the alternator bracket on the other side. This is the last thing holding the alternator on. Take this bolt out. Now you should be able to get the alternator up and out of here. It will take a little bit of wiggling just because this is kind of stuck in here. Maybe even some prying. When you pry, be very gentle. There we go. And you can take it right up and out. This is why I wanted to remove this bracket here, because it gives us all the room we need to pull out the alternator. There it is. Unfortunately, this is the best view I can give you with this AC hose kind of in the way of the middle of the water pump, but at least you can see the majority of what's happening. I want to start by removing this bracket. It's got a 10mm bolt attached to it over here, and then just a bunch of 12s that hold the water pump on. All right, there's that. Take that harness off. Now make sure you have a collection bucket underneath, because no matter how much coolant you drain, there will still be some that comes out when you pull this water pump off. I'm going to crack these all free, and then once they're all broken free, I'm going to start removing them one at a time. There's one bolt that's hidden right underneath this pulley here. All right, this is the last one, so I'm just gonna start removing the bolts. Okay, that one fell right in the coolant bucket. That's all right. All of the bolts are the same, so don't worry about keeping them separate. Double check that you have all of them before you start prying. And then there's a little ear right here that you can use to pry on and separate the water pump from the engine block. I'm gonna hold on to it as I do this. There we go. If you can, take that gasket off now. If not, we'll come back for it in a little bit, but there's your water pump. Pull this gasket off of here. There it is. Now take a razor blade and clean off the surface where the water pump mounts. Mine is actually in pretty good condition. There isn't a lot of corrosion or even the old gasket material left on here, but of course it's still a good idea to get it nice and clean so that you get a good seal. You don't want to have to come back here for a leak. So I recommend a razor blade because it's gentle enough to not damage the aluminum material, but it's also sharp enough to cut off any corrosion or debris or old gasket that you might have left here. Just go around the whole surface and make sure it's nice and clean. If you see this black stuff like this, that's the old gasket. Scrape that off. Then of course we'll clean it, absorb all that coolant that's still in there so you can put a new gasket on a nice dry surface. All right, wipe this all off. I'm gonna absorb all of this with a rag. If you have compressed air, it's a good idea to blow out the holes where the bolts thread in. Most of them are through holes, so there will be no liquid that will be compressed at the end of them if you put a bolt through with coolant in there. But it's still a good idea to have clean threads, otherwise the coolant can corrode them in the future and the bolt will be stuck. Apply brake parts cleaner to a clean rag and wipe this off just to degrease it. Make sure it's nice and dry and clean. Don't spray brake parts cleaner inside here where the coolant goes so that you don't get it inside the cooling system. You just want to wipe off the surface. I have my bolts ready, so I'm going to take my new water pump with a new gasket and slide it on here. It's going to be difficult to hold it all together, so be careful not to damage the gasket. Line it up, and as soon as one bolt hole lines up, you should be able to stick a bolt through just to hold it in place at least. Once you get one started, this one's threading on easily, so I'm just going to go all the way with it. But once you get that first one started, start in a second one, any bolt that lines up. And with two, this water pump should stay in place, and all the other bolt holes will line up. Let's just get all the other ones started. Just going to make sure they're all snug, and then we'll torque them down. The torque on all of these is 15 foot-pounds. All of these is 15 foot-pounds. That's all torqued, but I will go around one more time just to check them all. Might as well start here. All right. Now I'm just going to spray some brake parts cleaner in this area just to remove all the old coolant that is still here so I don't confuse it for a potential leak. And also I want to get it off of the pulleys. I don't want the belt to ride on coolant. Let's resecure this bracket with the 10mm bolt. And make sure it's snug. There we go. Push this wiring harness aside, take your alternator and slide it down in here. Once you line it up, if you have a bolt ready, you can slide it through. Move this around to get the threads to start in. Sometimes it'll take a little bit. There we go. Once you get this bolt to start, thread it in most of the way. Don't make it tight yet though, because we do still have to line up the bottom. All right, I got it close. This can still move around. Let's line up that bottom bolt. I'll slide this through. All right, once you get it started, let's bottom this out. 38 foot-pounds is the torque for both of these alternator bolts. Since we're on this one, might as well start by torquing this one. That's one. Well, that's done. Why do I smell food? It's probably because I'm hungry. And there you go. Both are torqued. Let's get that wire on. Resecure this bracket with the 10mm bolt. Make sure it sits nice and straight and snug it down. a little bit further up here, plug in your oil pressure sensor, and right next to it, resecure this harness. Make sure that clicks. Reattach this bracket if you took it off. Put the 2 bolts in and snug them up. Just going to use a wrench and make sure they're nice and tight. Perfect. Yep, those are tight. They're threading into aluminum, so once they get snug, leave them right there. Inspect the mounting surface on the engine right here. Mine's great. There's no corrosion. Sometimes a lot of corrosion builds up in there, so just be mindful of that. You want to clean it up if that's the case. Then take the new tensioner, get that bolt through. Inspect your bolt too. If it needs to be replaced, replace it. Once you slide that through, line this back up. It has a little nub here, a pin that needs to line up with that slot on the engine. Once you start that bolt on, it should not want to fall off, and now you should be able to easily thread it on the rest of the way. When bottoming this out, make sure that pin is still lined up in its hole. If it's not, the tensioner will not sit right, and that's a problem. This bolt for the tensioner gets torqued to 15 foot-pounds. If you don't have space to torque it because it's so close to the frame, just snug it up and then give it a little extra. Oh, that's 15 right there. I can pretty much only fit a 1/4-inch torque wrench. This is difficult to show you on camera, but I'm providing a diagram on the screen for you so you can see the exact routing of this belt. It has to go around the harmonic balancer, around the AC compressor, up and over the water pump on the flat side, over the alternator on the ribbed side again, and then the tensioner gets the flat side on the back side of the belt. I'm going to put it on all the pulleys except for the alternator because that's going to be the easiest one for me to actually get it up and over on. Difficult to show you on camera, but I'm providing a diagram on the screen for you so you can see the exact routing of this belt on the back side of the belt. So put that around and we're going to double check it. I don't know what I'm saying. And over on, once the other pulleys are situated, should stay in place for the most part, just like that. And I'm going to put my 14mm tool on here, put it right up and over that alternator. Okay, pull it to have as much slack as you can. Bring the belt over. Now take your negative battery terminal and connect it to the battery. Sometimes it can make a little spark. I cleaned up all the corrosion. I also got rid of that pad that's down there, and sometimes it's useful. Other times, if it was full of corrosion like mine was, it's actually worse off being there, so you're better off taking it off. Anyway, put this battery terminal back on in, make it nice and snug. Don't crush it down because it'll actually stretch this right here, and then you will have a hard time tightening it up in the future. As long as you can't spin it by hand like this, you're good to go. So this is tight enough. Keep in mind, on some of these vehicles, when you disconnect the battery, you may have to recalibrate the steering angle sensor, and that entails turning the steering wheel all the way to the left and then all the way to the right, and then centering it up so that the sensor can relearn its positions on both ends and in the center. To fill the cooling system, I have a funnel set up on the radiator cap here. It's a spill-proof funnel, and it also helps bleed because now this is going to be the highest point in the cooling system, and naturally air is going to want to rise in here and bubble out. If you don't have this, well, just make sure you don't spill all over the place and keep the area nice and dry. I'm going to use coolant that is appropriate for this vehicle. If you're unsure of what to use, check your owner's manual, and that should guide you in using the proper type of coolant. I'm going to fill this up, not all the way, but about halfway, and then let it bubble. Naturally, the air is going to want to rise to the top. It stopped bubbling, so at this point you want to run the vehicle until it gets up to operating temperature. Let that water pump circulate all the coolant and hopefully push the rest of the air out of the system, and you'll see it bubbling up through the funnel. In here, you're going to want the blower motor on low, the heat all the way up, and I'd like to have it blow on the vents so I can feel the heat. Make sure recirculate is off and AC is also off. And watch that temperature gauge to make sure it doesn't climb above the halfway point. If it does, shut it off. It's most likely just an air bubble, but as long as it stays at operating temperature, let's shut it off and cap everything off. Squeeze on the upper radiator hose just a little bit as you plug this off if you use one of these funnels, and then let go of that radiator hose as you pull this out. This is going to minimize the spillage here. Now, of course, I still spilled a little bit. I'm going to clean this up with a rag in a little bit, but now we can pull this off and reinstall our radiator cap. It'll find its spot that it wants to sit in and turn it 2 clicks to the right. There you go, that's tight. I'm gonna put the rest of my coolant in my overflow tank. As you can see, it's pretty empty. So if you don't already have it full, go ahead and fill it. Take this cap off and fill it to the full line. Right about there. I know it's a tiny bit under, but that's perfect. That's everything I had in my funnel, as long as it's pretty much full. This is just a reserve, basically. Cap that off, and there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it was helpful. If you have anything to say, leave it in the comments section below. And as always, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell so you can stay up to date with all of our latest content. Thanks for watching.